O'Connor, a good Waterford man. Will he have some hopes for the Daoise this year in terms of the hurling championship, or do Limerick just win?
I think Limerick, I won't say Limerick just win, but I think Limerick have to still be considered the very strong favourites to win the championship this year. Like, Waterford have definitely made progress under Cal and got to a point 2 years ago where they got to an All-Ireland final. So Waterford have been back on the ascendancy again. It was good to see Cork have a run to an All-Ireland final last season, albeit they looked a distance behind Limerick in the All-Ireland final. Limerick were just so impressive back in August in that decider. And look, Tipperary, with a change in management as well, will perhaps get a hope of a renewed season and getting that bit closer, maybe getting back to their 2019 level. And as we'll chat with James Skehill in a few minutes' time, Galway will be hopeful that last year was just a bit of a blip, and maybe the season before, and that again they can get back to contending against Limerick, because it's not that long ago that Galway were in an All-Ireland semi-final where, a couple of injuries aside, they pushed Limerick all the way in the last 4 contests. So I've said it before, I think Limerick need a good dance partner, perhaps to even enhance their legacy more, that if they can get a rival who can push them all the way and they have a few epic battles, it'll perhaps see them go down in history, even more loved than they perhaps are now. But then again, I do wonder, Johnny, if their success is sustained as it has been with Munster Championship, with the league and with the All-Irelands that they've been running off, at some point will people get sick of Limerick winning, and will the narrative become, Limerick don't go for goals, Limerick are maybe a bit over physical, I wish someone else would come through and win.
First of all, the sliotar is far too light at the moment, and I think that Limerick's ability to get points from all over the pitch is a major help. But secondly, Galway lost them by a point on a couple of occasions in recent years when Galway didn't really hurl at all for much of the game. So like there are hopes for Galway in terms of James Skehill. I mentioned Darragh O'Connor there. Niall Cronin, Darragh O'Connor and myself would have shared the press room at the racetrack on many occasions. Niall Cronin was involved with Naas. Did extremely well with them underage, had a brief stint with the senior team, and was speaking to me for years about the potential for Naas as a complete sleeping giant in Kildare. This year has been unbelievable for them. They're big outsiders against Crokes, and I suppose there was talk earlier on the week that Paul Mannion might miss the game. It's at Croker tomorrow, 5 o'clock, so it'll be an absolute cracker. Unfortunately for Naas, he is going to be fit to play, but this is the makings of a really, really interesting game.
Yeah, look, hopefully it's tight. We got 2 very entertaining Leinster semi-finals just before Christmas. The Naas Shamaliers game was a nail-biter. Went down to extra time after Eamon Callaghan scored a very late equaliser in the game. And the kind of romance of Club GAA, a player who had gone to Croke Park so many times with Kildare and lost big games, in his 40th year, kicks a point to send it to extra time where Naas get the victory in the end. And this is a Naas team, Johnny, who changed their management team late on within their championship campaign and have had a player-led team in charge of them for the Leinster Championship. And they've been scoring really freely. Like, they put in 7 goals in their first 2 games in the Leinster Championship. They finally managed to shake off the shackles of Shamaliers, particularly in the first half of extra time in that semi-final, which they probably shouldn't have won, but they'll feel maybe they've got out of jail a couple of times with the own goal that Tullamore scored in the last few seconds, which saw them go through in the first round, that win against Shamaliers, and now they can have a cut in their first ever Leinster final against the team who many feel will be the All-Ireland champions, which is that star-studded Kilmacud Crokes team. I think it's huge news, though, that Paul Mannion is fit to start tomorrow, because without him, he's so key to how Kilmacud move the ball in their forward line.
Like, in terms of the dangers then for Kilmacud Crokes, they're obviously hot favourite. Like, who are Naas's kind of sharp shooters that could score enough points which they'll badly need against Crokes to actually win this game?
Well, see, the thing is, they have a core group of players who are a little bit older, like Owen Doyle, like Eamon Callaghan.
The boy Leper.
Yeah, and that's the thing. They've got so much experience through inter-county and also club. Many people have been focusing on the fact that the Naas players have been coming through from an underage machine that they've had in recent years. And some of these players have been watching at schools level coming through into the team. But they've still got a core group of very experienced players. I think they play really nice football, Johnny. I think sometimes in the game against Shamaliers, they retreated too far and allowed the Wexford champions to have a little bit too much possession. And Naas were happy enough to play on the counter. But maybe that style of football might actually work quite well against Kilmacud Crokes, who will try and force the issue. The thing about Crokes, though, they're very unlikely to kick as many wides as they did during the game against Portarlington. They left 20 scoring chances behind them, many of which were gilt-edged chances. And some of their shot selections were poor against the Portarlington team, who defended well. They put up the bolted back door in front of them and said, look, come and attack us. But Kilmacud sometimes made some poor decisions. And it was the aforementioned Paul Mannion who sometimes ran into very clever positions to actually give them the win when they decided to press up a bit in the second half. So I think Crokes probably have to be considered, the favourites going into this game. But hopefully Naas can put in a performance that's a bit more like what they put in extra time, albeit so much of the chat around that, Johnny, was around the rule where you get a black card late in the game, you're punished by the black card into extra time. Well, if you've had a player red carded, you still get back to 15 at full time, which I always think is a crazy rule. I think there should be more of a consistency in that. I think you should still play with 14 players in extra time if you had someone sent off.
We'd Coach Murphy on during the week, given his Premier League team of the half season so far. Coach O'Callaghan, what do you do with Paul Mannion here? I mean, whoever is marking him, will he even sleep tonight? And do they just effectively double, treble, 4-time team him? What do they do?
Look, potentially at this level, when you're up against a player that's that much of a superstar and a multiple all-star, double coverage is definitely an option. I think Naas will hope that systematically they're able to stop him, and maybe to make the supply into the forward line poor is what they'll look to do. I think there's a lot from the first half blueprint from Portarlington that Naas may well be able to look at when they look at the video and say, right, if we can get a system like that and make it very difficult for Kilmacud to do anything inside our 45, maybe that's the way to try and keep Paul Mannion quiet, because he relishes when the game stretches. And that's what happened in that semi-final. When a bit of space was there and when Portarlington were a bit fatigued, he was able to open his legs and get the ball moving with his feet. And that's the one thing that Naas have to watch out for, is that when Kilmacud invariably break themselves, they don't want to leave space for Mannion to run into. And
maybe there'll be Dublin GA supporters tomorrow who will want to go to Croke Park to see Paul Mannion, because they're not going to get the opportunity this year. We should say that Pádraig Pearse's victory over Mount Ballymoylaw was completely overshadowed. And, obviously there were controversial decisions, but by hook or by crook, to borrow the phrase, they're playing Knockmore, which would be a fascinating Connacht final as well.
Yeah, Tommy was making this point in the Club Championship show yesterday that understandably everything was overshadowed by what happened to Jerome Henry, the referee, towards the end of it, and the potential suspensions, some of them that could be up to 2 years that may fall from the end of that for some of the players from Ballymoylaw. But Pádraig Pearse has dug out a result in that game when many people would have expected that it was Mount Ballymoylaw who would go through. They're a team who got the Dailies with all their experience of Roscommon running through that team. They've got a very experienced manager in Pat Flanagan, who's been an inter-county manager with both Westmeath and with Offaly, and has had various different teams across counties that have been successful. And he's a guy who's a stager that got them to a 2019 final when Pádraig Pearse has had their breakthrough that year. They lost out to one of the best club teams of all time in Corofin, and they'll be hoping to go up against a Knockmore team who've been tested in their 2 games so far, Johnny. Going into the water break against Torlestrand, they were 2 points down. They finished the game strongly, the Mayo champions, to come through. Maybe they have a slight advantage that the game is in Ballina when it comes to this weekend. But that one is a very hard game to call, and I think it's pretty much 50-50 with the bookmakers going into it. And then I'm sure we'll talk about the hurling a little bit more with James Skehill in a moment, but a cracking Munster hurling final in potential this weekend, where Kilmallock, who dismantled Middleton in the semi-finals, kept them scoreless for 18 minutes of the first half against a Ballygunner team who were free scoring against Ballyea in the quarter-final. And then in the semi-final, again, a game that was probably overshadowed because of the 2 red cards, the Lockmore Castleiney players, the McGraths, who were sent off during it. But still, Ballygunner found a way to win. I was looking at Pádraig Manny's interviews with the newspapers today, and he was saying he does not care a jot about those who have been criticising Ballygunner in recent weeks, because there were plenty of people, and I didn't like the fact that 2 Ballygunner players went straight to the umpire once John McGrath had given the slap to the hand and tried to get a red card produced. And some people were unhappy with the idea of maybe Ballygunner players going down to ensure they got advantages during the fixture.
Yep.
All Ballygunner care about is winning. They've had 1 Munster title in recent years when they've been the consistent team probably in Munster since 2015. It's all about getting over the line at Páirc Uí Chaoimh for them on Sunday afternoon when they go up against Kilmallock. So that should be a great one. It's very hard for anyone to run a dynasty really in the Munster Hurling Championship. I think 6 is still the top amount of titles that's ever been won, which is Finbar's, and that's going back quite a while. And this is, potentially a really, really good game between Ballygunner and Kilmallock at the weekend.
Coach O'Callaghan is vaguely extolling the dark arts there, I think.
Yeah, look, I think you probably have to use some of them along the way. I will be the first person who will be critical about the fact that your teams are taking every advantage going into a game. But even as much as we try and be romantic, or as Dara said, a little bit twee about the club game, teams will do what they need to do to get over the line. And if you're a Ballygunner player who's played in 3 or 4 Munster finals and come out on the wrong side of results, you won't mind if you have to take every advantage to try and get over Kilmallock this weekend. And if anyone gets a chance to listen back to the podcast, we had Paddy O'Brien from Kilmallock on. Again, a slightly crazy story, Johnny. He's getting married today ahead of the game on Sunday. It's amazing how this seems to have worked out, that a lot of people push their weddings back into this year because of the restrictions. Then their club does well, and they've had to navigate weddings in the middle of very important championship games. But he thinks it actually might be a bad thing for him, because he can focus on the wedding and everything around that, and then he only has 2 days to think about one of the biggest games of his life, where he's going to try and win himself a second Munster club medal at the weekend. And you heard as well from Dara about the Clonmorris story, where they have 17 players available for their All-Ireland defence against Raharney on Sunday afternoon, because some players weren't able to be registered, because this competition goes back to 2020. I know it's being finished in 2022 now, and their captain from 2019 will be togging out, despite the fact that she's 8 months pregnant, to ensure that they will have at least 15 players available, because they only had 14 to play in the semi-final where they won against that league. So this time of year, I know we've got the inter-county coming back, but there's always so many crazy stories in the club that are just so intriguing. Well,
I mean, the photo opportunities there, to put it mildly, are off the charts, and we will talk to James Skehill shortly, but it's... I don't know. I think the club championship, it has a special place, I think, in the sense that there's maybe a lot of cynicism about kind of football at inter-county level at the moment. It's so dominated by a select number of teams. Hurling isn't far off at the same time, and you get, I don't know, is it more magic kind of lives on a bit more in the club championship?
Maybe a little bit. Also, the fact that we're living in an era where we may well have seen the best club football team of all time in Corofin, and their dynasty is maybe coming towards an end. And at the same time, we've got a Ballyhale Shamrocks team in the hurling particularly, who are just magic, Johnny. They're going to try and win back-to-back titles. I have never known a forward line in club hurling to be as strong as they have right now. And this is a club who've had players like Henry Shefflin, who've had Michael Fennelly along the way. But to have the last 2 Young Hurler of the Year, also to have TJ Reid and to have Colin Fennelly in the same forward line in a club is just remarkable. And that's not to include the inter-county players that they have at pretty much every other line of the team. It's not to say that St. Thomas won't take them out on the 23rd of January, because St. Thomas have been really impressive so far this year. But we might be living through one of the great club teams in Ballyhale Shamrocks of all time right now. And the bizarre part is they probably should have been knocked out a few weeks ago in Tullamore against St. Rynas, where they had won what was called the Ballyhale Mary play at the end, a 65, which they were able to drop in, that was scrambled home for a goal in the end by Owen Cody. And that was enough to see them go through to a Leinster final, where they won by a record margin against Cluck Ballacalla and looked so impressive at Croke Park a couple of weeks ago. I think we might be living in an era of greatness, which adds that little bit of extra intrigue about watching the club championships over the next few weeks as well.
Who wins the football championship in the club?
I don't know. You see, I like Kilcoo, and I've been impressed by Kilcoo all year. And they, even with some of the dark arts that were seen in that final a couple of years ago against Corofin at Croke Park, could have easily won that game and could have easily been lifting the Andy Merrigan Cup. And I think if they get a run and come through and go into an All-Ireland semi-final, they'll be very difficult to beat. But I take the point that if Kilmacud Crokes can hit full steam, they probably have the best team left in the competition. And yeah, you probably would edge towards Kilmacud Crokes, but I think Kilcoo would give them a right good battle along the way. And I would have to say about Kilmacud, watch the Dublin final, watch the game against Port Arlington. They didn't quite play to their full potential in either of those fixtures. It's whether they can be clinical and put in a full 60-minute performance, and then we'll know a lot more. We might know a lot more about what the potential destination of the Cup will be after that game tomorrow between Crokes and Naas.
What sort of crowd in Croker?
I don't know. It's probably going to be just a few thousand, you would think. Like, Kilmacud's obviously like a massive population area, and they will bring a crowd along. And similarly, like, Naas is very well populated. I wonder how many neutrals will go to Croke Park at 5 o'clock on a Saturday when the game is on RT television, though. Like, it's an easy one not to travel in early January. And I think for a lot of GA supporters who would be, say, neutrally inclined, if you're really kind of excited about going to a game, they'll probably go to matches in the pre-season competitions tomorrow and watch their own county. But the other good news, if you are a fan, you want to be at home, aside from the matches that are on TV, there's a load of games being streamed this weekend. There were issues with Kerry and Limerick, which resulted in Munster GA having to give refunds. I know Owen Shane was one of the people who was stuck at home that couldn't get access to watch his beloved Kerry during the week.
There was an internet meltdown, wasn't there?
Yeah, I think there was just so many people registered to actually watch the game that the servers had an issue, and then a few hundred people were able to get through after that. But in the end, Munster GA just had to put the game up for free and give refunds all around. So hopefully with the streaming services this weekend, and even with the All-Ireland Camogie finals being on their YouTube as well, it's never been as easy to have access to games than we would have had before. Hopefully we don't end up in the same positions we talked about with the Premier League earlier, where it's burnout that there's just too many games that are viewable.
Yeah.
But I think it's been one of the upshots of the pandemic that more GA is now available to watch than ever before.
Of course, JD is such a consummate professional, you wouldn't have known on the day, but I was late for one of the Saturday shows recently because I was delayed watching the Connacht junior ladies final because my sister was playing for St. Brendan's, and I paid the tenner to watch the stream. The commentary was brilliant, but it went well into injury time, so I ended up being late. But it was amazing to watch. Like you're paying for a stream. I think the game was somewhere in Mayo. I think they were playing the Sligo champions and won by a point. And for the junior ladies, it was the drama and the excitement was unbelievable. James Skehill, you've played a few interesting games in your time yourself, but would you like to be in Ballinasloe this weekend?
I've played a few games, right, yeah, but I think now my time has passed, so I'll be a happy spectator anyway. Yeah,
like any part of you a little bit regretful you're not involved with big King Henry at the helm?
I'm not going to lie, there was a little bit of an itch, if you want to put it that way, probably a 2% itch, but that quickly went away as Christmas came along and I heard the guys were training hard. But I'll tell you what it was, it's an exciting time. I think there was a lot of, I suppose, documented negativity with Galway going back into the last autumn and into last winter, and that's truly been fixed now. So I think the whole county as a whole is excited. They're looking forward to see what kind of team Henry puts out and what kind of pattern they play. I think the game itself will just be an introduction. I think he's for himself more so than the players to see what he has in front of him, because you can only gain so much from training and some trial games. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of team he puts out, what way to go about their business, and hopefully they'll just put in a good performance in Offaly.
And obviously the King Henry Fennelly narrative is fascinating as well, going into it.
Yeah, I was trying to think. I was racking my brain there yesterday even to see with the club mates that ever faced off in an inter-county hurling management situation, and I still can't grasp. Maybe Jimmy Barry Murphy and John Allen being St. Finbarr's club mates, but beyond that, I couldn't think of anyone. So that's a fascinating situation too. When you think, I'm just putting myself in my own situation. If I was to face off with a club mate, it would be, you nearly want to beat them more. You know what I mean? Just because they're in the locality, in the community, you'd nearly want just to. Obviously, there's a professional basis to this, don't get me wrong, but certainly it would probably be close friends, possibly neighbours, that you want to get one over them.
How do Offaly approach this, Will?
I think this is a difficult one, Johnny, because I think Offaly's year is going to be determined on what happens in 3 or 4 months' time, as opposed to the body of work through the Welsh Cup and the National League. Offaly have got a very difficult group in the National League, which starts with Galway. Bizarrely enough, in a few weeks' time, the teams will meet again in the first round of the league. I think the blueprint for Offaly's year has to be, Johnny, very similar to Westmeath last year, with the exception of one game. So Offaly are coming out of the Christie Ring and from Division 2, where they played really well last year, albeit it was a shortened Division 2 and there wasn't a final, so it was a sprint as opposed to the normal format. They won the Christie Ring at a canter last season, played really well in the final against Derry, 49 scores on the day. They'll be expecting to be very competitive in the Joe McDonagh, and they'll be hoping that playing Division 1 hurling, even if it results in defeats like Westmeath had last year in a similar grouping of teams, that will actually give them a leg up when they play against primarily Division 2 teams in the Second Flight Championship later in the year. There's a lot of injuries that Offaly have had to deal with, and like Oisin Kelly, who was their best player last year and was named the Joe McDonagh Player of the Year, got injured at football training with Belmont just before their championship quarter-final, and he's going to be out until the end of the season with the cruciate. So maybe he can come back in for some of the Joe McDonagh, but it's even a difficult ask to have him back fit for that. And it's going to be a very difficult baptism for them going back up to Division 1, given that they've been hurling in Third Flight Championship and in Second Flight League now for quite some time. And my worry would be that they'll go to Ballinasloe and get a bit of a scutcheon at the weekend. It's important that I think they don't take a heavy defeat, but it's going to be a huge step up in intensity, physicality compared to where they were playing last year with a primarily fairly young team. And a
bit of a scutcheon, as Will calls it there, James, really isn't good to either of these.
No, it's not. I think from Offaly's perspective, really what they want is, if they're Michael Finley, you want to see a competitive nature for the whole game. Yes, there could be a vast difference in quality amongst teams. There could be a high score on Galway's perspective, but really, if I'm Michael Finley, I want to see Offaly trudging that Galway for 75 minutes regardless of the scoreline. At least then he can build on that. If they throw in the towel, let's say, after half time or with 40 minutes gone, there's no team either good. So I think both teams are looking for competition. Games are far better than than training with the all-know. Conditions will be irrelevant because the pitch in Ballinasloe can take a bit of rain. So we're expecting to have a good surface. So I think both managers will be looking at the game with an eager anticipation to get started.
Do you buy into the narrative that Galway, which is essentially the prevailing narrative, is that Galway have underperformed in recent seasons, or were they simply not good enough? What's going on in the county? What's the expectation this year?
I think it's an amalgamation of both, to be honest. I have no problem admitting that I was part of teams that we know we had the quality in terms of player, but we just didn't put it together on the day, And I think that happens when a team loses like this. Look in the mirror first of all and see where do we go wrong inside, before you go blaming anybody else. And 9 times out of 10, from Galway's perspective, we simply didn't click on the day. We didn't perform well together. We made some, unforced errors, and that just at a very high level when you're playing high quality teams. The margin of error is so small, the percentage of difference is so small that 1 or 2 big instances or errors in the game could result in a defeat. That's the way it is. But I think from Galway's expectation this year, there's a lot of games coming up. I think it's our nature that we want to win everything, obviously. Can we win everything? I'm not sure. Potentially, if we win every game from now until the end of May, we'll have played 17 games, So there's a lot of games coming up. There's going to be challenges in terms of, COVID is obviously going to present its own issues. Can all the players avoid that? Hopefully. Every player, not every squad, I would hope. Can injuries, can we avoid injuries? Is our squad deep enough that we can carry a big injury to a big player? I don't know. I think there's going to be a bit of a small bit of a rebuild. You still have the same, 10 or 11, guys who were highly influential in the squad, and then they'll be supported by a couple of new guys, I'd imagine. So I'm hoping for a clean bill of health throughout the course of the World Cup, the league, the championship, and then we'll see where we go. I think at a minimum, you're looking at a World Cup final, you're looking at a league semi-final, and you're looking at a Leinster final. That's what I'm thinking, to be honest. And I think when you have someone of the calibre of Henry over the squad who has got a winner's mentality, that's obvious. I think they'll be the minimum stage we have to get to also.
Will mentioned Evan Nyland, who's actually 24 this summer. Who are the young players that Galway could introduce to replace, as has been referenced, in the build-up to the game? Some players obviously getting on a bit. Big Joe not in the panel this year at the moment anyway. Who are the young lads to look out for?
Well, I wouldn't say young lads. I would say new guys who may have not been introduced to the first 15, because the first 15 have been so strong for so long. But I am expecting a big year off Evan. He had a very good club championship for Clownbridge. Will he take over the free-taking duties? That remains to be seen. He needs to nail down his first 15 position first. He'd
remind me a bit of Ger Farher, the way he strikes the ball.
Yeah, left-sided, stands over, a single-step strike, and he's extremely, extremely accurate from anywhere from 75 yards, And that nowadays is extremely important. You look at Gillette, Horgan, TJ Reeves, they don't miss Reeves, So you have to have a good free taker to keep the scoreboard ticking. But I won't say new players as such, but I'm looking for a really big year of Conor Whelan and Brian Buchanan. The two guys, the two excellent players, two very influential players. I'm just looking for them to go up a step again and kind of carry the forward unit for Galway, you could say.
And will how could you write the narrative of when Galway eventually play Kilkenny and the two boys in the sideline, and just like the hurling championship, you mentioned Limerick might have an unassailable advantage, but it's built up to be an absolute cracker.
Yeah, it couldn't have been said any better, Johnny, when we had a feeling that these two were probably going to meet either at the very end of the round robin or at the very start. So weekend 1, the bank holiday weekend, it's going to be Galway against Kilkenny to kick off the Leinster Championship, where the winners are going to be in a really strong position to get to a Leinster final. The losers are going to be playing catch-up straight away. It's Cody against Shefflin. That's a game that's going to need absolutely no hype whatsoever. And we'll have a good idea of where Galway and Kilkenny are at after the league at the end of this, because, with the way things are with the split season, it's a bit weird going from a league into another league format in a way where you play Division 1 and then you go into a round robin, which is essentially a league to decide the knockout stages of the championship. But I will admit, over the last couple of seasons, and I don't know how you feel about this, James, I kind of missed the round robin section of the two provincial championships a bit.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. I know, even from a playing perspective, they were excellent. You had set games coming up. You had a minimum of 5 games, and it was made the best team win over the course of that group stage, you could say. I think that gets lost a bit in the recent, knockout situation whereby, anyone can play bad in the day. We saw that with Galway and Dublin. Anyone can play bad, but the group stage gives you a chance. And I do think over the course of 5 games, the best teams usually come out on top. I think from Galway's perspective, they've got a pretty okay draw. They have to go away to Wexford, but in terms of teams coming to Galway, Kilkenny and Dublin, I take that because Dublin itself, Carnell Park is just a place to play, as we know, is Nolan Park. So again, as I said earlier on, I'd be expecting a final from Galway.
It's fair to say Galway have a checkered history with managers not from the county, right? And when Micheál Donoghue, when they won the All-Ireland, Micheál Donoghue, those epic scenes with his dad after crossing the Shannon, like quintessentially Galway, you'd even get emotional thinking about it now as a Galway man. Obviously, James, people will expect that King Henry wants the Kilkenny job down the line. Is there any sense in the Galway camp that he's only here to progress to get that eventuality, or will this be total commitment from the man?
Well, I think it'd be a fool to think that he's going to stay in Galway forever. So I think obviously people are going to know that he's going to go at some stage. But I think the man he's driven to carry out a 2-year term. I think he's fully focused on what's in front of him in Galway. I don't think the supporters are thinking that far ahead and that he's going to bail out. I don't think he's going to do that at all. I think he's an extremely driven man. He wants to be as professional as possible. It's a great opportunity for him as a person, as a manager in his young managerial career, let's say, to go on to, I suppose, better things closer to home, if you want to call it that. But there's no, again, I go back to the point I made earlier, there's real anticipation and real excitement in Galway, and that comes with Henry, I think it's a really good appointment. And that provides, I suppose, a fresh rejuvenation for everyone in Galway, players and supporters alike. So we're looking forward to it. I look forward to the next 2 years, to be honest.
From Ballyhale and Thomastown, what do we know from, his reputation precedes him as even not only as a player but as a manager? What makes him special as a manager? What could potentially make him special enough to bring Galway back to winning the Lee McCarthy? Yeah, well, I think the biggest thing from his perspective is that he's done it all. He's been involved for Kilkenny with a great number of years, and obviously in his young stages of Kilkenny, he was more watching and playing, as opposed to the latter stages of his career. He was probably assisting in a captaincy role and liaising with Brian Cody, etc., for maintaining standards and I won't say team selection, obviously, but standard of play, etc. So I'd say he's seen both sides pretty well. Ballyhale, he goes into the club manager. I don't care anybody says that. I saw written on Twitter recently about I'm sure anyone would win with that Ballyhale team. That's utter nonsense. You have any championship you win. It's a difficult championship to win, no matter what clientele you have under your jurisdiction. So I think for him going to Ballyhale, winning the championship a couple of times, and then going to Thomastown, which was kind of a bit from left field. I didn't expect that myself. So it just shows he's not shying away from challenges or from difficult positions, and as you can see, him taking over Galway. And I expect him from a playing perspective, I'd imagine he'd keep it simple. A Kilkenny style of hurling, win your own ball, win your own contest. Don't get hold up on your own man and then go from there. Is it fair to say that there's probably universal acclaim for this appointment in Galway, whereas there wouldn't have been if Davy got it? Yeah, I think there would have been a different dynamic, to be honest, guys, if Davy got it. As I said a moment ago, there's quite a lot of positivity around the Henry appointment because of what he's such a glittering career. He's a very, very, what you'd say, personal man, but what I see, I've only ever spoken to the man once. What did you say to him?
And I don't even know how sober I was.
Neither does he.
But he comes across a very nice person, very gentleman-like, family man, as you can see. And, he's intimidating in his own way because of what he's done in his own career. On the pitch, you could say. So that was a nice appointment. I think with Davy, I don't think I probably would have been the same situation. I think it would have been probably a more negative spin on it, and with a bit of drama coming to Galway. So I was quite content to hear Henry got the job. There you go, Will. If James had been a bit nicer over the few points, you might have invited him back into the panel.
There you go, a chance to come back in to help with the goalkeeping situation and maybe provide some competition. I was thinking as well, James, when it comes to the style of hurling that Shefflin is likely to play with Galway, they'll have to wait for the St. Thomas players to come back, and who knows, it could be more than a month, it could be a few weeks before those players are available to play again. But for the best part, are Galway well set up to play that Kilkenny style of hurling, or maybe that Ballyhale style of hurling that we saw Shefflin play as a manager?
Yeah, I do think simplicity is key for me. I think when you introduce too much information or too much, I suppose, difficulty around game plans, it can nearly flood players' minds sometimes. And I think from a Galway perspective, if we stick to a simple style of play where we try, keep a tight back unit and try to create a whole host of space up in the forward unit, we certainly have the players to do that. We've great defenders who can win their own ball and win their own contests, and when we've got attackers who can make their own space and take their own scores. So I think a simple game plan like that would suit us. Now I'll also say that if if there's a bit of ingenuity from Henry towards the game plan, our guys can certainly take that on board and implement it too. But I'd be expecting from the outset, especially from the first week in January on for the next 4 or 5 weeks, that you'd see a simple style of hurling whereby I suppose Henry's trying to get a look at what he has in front of him, and it's a case of, as I said, win your 50-50 contest and let's see who will have.
And it seems like based on the amount of times that he was photographed at matches as well, James, he's been out soaking up quite a bit of info about Galway hurling during the end of the club championship and the late stages of year 2021.
Yeah, like if I was to take theoretically, if I was to take the Kilkenny job tomorrow morning, like I would know very little players beyond that of the Kilkenny squad. You know, so I think Henry probably was in a similar situation. He's obviously got a couple of Galway guys with him, and Jamie Dyson, Kevin Lally on the sideline, who have their own knowledge of the Galway club scene, obviously. But I think from Henry's perspective, he'd want to come up and see with his own eyes, you know, and see the style of hurling that's produced in the club game. If there's any player that he may have seen that wouldn't necessarily be in the limelight of the senior squad, you could say. So I think he's certainly got off to a good start in attending games. And again, when he attended the games, there was great positivity from the crowd who welcomed him in with open arms. So I think he's got a good start in terms of what he's seen in front of him. And they've got a good training block done pre-Christmas. So again, I repeat myself, everyone is really looking forward to this year.
Just my last question for you. This is the one thing that I don't enjoy about hurling at the moment. I think there are far too many scores. That might sound daft, but any thoughts on the sliotar?
Oh, the sliotar, yeah. How much time do we have?
Yeah. we have to answer this in about 10 seconds, actually.
To be honest, guys. No, I think we touched on this before. I do have an issue with the sliotar I don't have the issue with the weight. I have an issue with the rim size.
Right.
I do believe that if you rewind back 20 years and you put, you know, a Limerick team or a Cork team or a Galway team beside, you know, a Limerick team, Cork team or Galway team back then, I think you'll see the S&C are poles apart.
Yes.
So I don't think people are giving enough consideration to the size of the player, the power of the player, you know, and also the advance in probably the hurls, but you know, so all these things like accumulate, and people just look at the scores and then they point to the ball straight away. But I think you have to look at what's striking the ball and what's in control of striking the ball. All those things put into play. But I think a start is certainly the rim size. The rim size nowadays are way too small. They're almost like a baseball/tennis ball. So there's no real, I suppose, you know, wind influence, if you like, or just the velocity of the ball just goes away from me in no time. Whereas in a few years back, where the rims were, you know, 2 or 3 mil, not the major we're talking here, we're not talking taking the hand off yet, but at least it would slow it down a small bit and kind of curtail 100-yard scores.
Fascinating stuff. And just to finish up then, there's no chance of you and Big Joe coming back then?
My body won't be able to do it. I won't speak for Joe, like he's his own man, but I certainly, when you get a taste of a break, I don't want to give it up. Yeah.
Have you any inkling at all he might come back?
I don't. Truthfully speaking, I haven't spoken to the man in months. I don't know what he's doing. I know he's involved with the minor squad, assistant Fergal Healy on whatever. It could be a coaching role, it could be whatever type of role he's taken up. So I would doubt there'll be a possibility of come back. He said himself that once he's done, he's done. So I'd say I'll hold him true to his word.
Do you know, finally, this is one of these iconic images from a game I was at when Galway lost to Dublin, the Leinster Championship. How many years ago was that in Parnell Park?
Ooh, that was 19. Not 19 years ago, 2019.
19. So, obviously that game, Galway only were knocked out because the other game had to be a draw. And I remember all the Galway fans started looking up to Henry Shefflin, who was doing, he had the headphones on, he was doing RT at the time, and he gave the news it was a draw. And the feeling around the ground among Galway fans, couldn't believe it. I think it was June and Galway were out the championship. But the point Joe got when he came off the bench that day, it was a controversial point actually, it may not have gone over. The roar I heard that day, James, in Parnell Park, I've never heard anything like it for 12,000 fans. You can imagine if Joe came back at some stage this year.
Oh God, yeah, I did lift the roof off the place, but he had come back from a long injury spell, if memory serves me correctly. I think he got injured in the league semi-final against Waterford. I'm up for the correction. So he has battled back, kind of a race against time really, to get back to have some sort of part to play in the championship. And I suppose, to be honest, we were struggling that game. We were struggling for the vast periods of the game. Dublin has struck a couple of goals and things were going against us. He came on. First of all, him running on the pitch gave a bit of an uplift to the supporters, which didn't give an uplift to the fans or to the players. And then when he got a score out the left-hand side, that just kind of, it thought we'd gain a bit of momentum back then. But those were too good in the day. Probably weren't good enough. Simple as that.
Top man.
Yeah.
OTB AM is brought to you by Gillette. Good morning start with Gillette. Put your best face forward with their new and improved razors. Will, I've deep concerns going forward that essentially all children are going to sound the same. They'll basically be brought up looking at YouTube. They'll have a quasi-American Irish accent and you won't know whether they're from Ballygunner or Ballyhale. James Skehill has a Galway accent and always will.
He does, yeah. No, it's a strong Western inflection on his voice and speaks very passionately about Galway hurling. And I think as hurling fans, we're intrigued to see whether Galway can come back to the fore this year. I think last year it was almost psychological rather than personnel, the underperformances that they put in.
I'd agree with that.
In the Dublin game, and then also the way that they were blitzed by Waterford to go out the championship. Like, they went out incredibly tamely, while at least when you look back at 2019 and that final day madness in the Leinster Championship group stage, that Galway were still competitive and not too far off the top teams in Leinster that year, but they looked well off the pace in the Waterford game last season. So I think Henry Shefflin's man management might be as important as the tactical innovations that he might bring in over the course of 2022. And again, as a hurling fan, let's hope that Tipperary and Galway particularly can get back to a level to try and compete with Waterford and Limerick, who've been the standard bearers over the last couple of years. Cork will be hoping that it wasn't just one bad summer, Johnny. And then we'll see where Kilkenny are at and whether they can compete with the very top again. Because we still remember in 2019, Limerick were beaten by Kilkenny in the semi-final when Kilkenny played absolutely out of their skins. So even though people may well have doubts about Brian Cody still being the manager of the team, and has he been there for too long, Cody has still managed to get something out of this team in recent years, whether that was Leinster titles, that comeback against Galway in the Leinster final a couple of years ago, winning the National League a few years ago as well. Write them off at your peril, really. And look, I think from a purely footballing perspective, I'm disappointed I can't go along to watch Offaly and Dublin in the O'Byrne Cup tomorrow, because the Offaly under-20s are about to make their breakthrough because of circumstance more than anything, because Offaly have a few of their key players away between the army and travelling, and in the case of Shane Horn opting out for the year. There's 11 of that All-Ireland under-20 team from last year who are on the panel for tomorrow's game against Dublin, and quite a few of them are probably going to get blooded ahead of time under John Mahon and Tomás O'Shea. So I kind of love this time of year. There's a blank page out in front, and this is why we go along to watch these pre-season games.